let's talk about how you get crypto, right? Because you have to move from a bank account, you have to get your economic energy onto the chain somehow. And it used to be the case that this was really difficult to do, which is why centralized exchanges popped up, right? You had the option in the old days, you could go on localbitcoins.com and you could try and meet up with someone in a private place and actually swap Bitcoin with them peer-to-peer, right? That was one of the ways you could do it. But then there were these other services that popped up, including Coinbase and Circle and various other places where you could go and you could link a bank account, do some minimal KYC, and take your economic value from your bank account and put it onto the chain. Very often this was through buying cryptocurrencies directly, right? You would buy Bitcoin using your Coinbase account, or you would buy Ethereum when it came out. It took a little while, but then this really cool thing called Tether came along when you started being able to do smart contracts. So you were able to, instead of just buying a cryptocurrency, you could buy a stable coin, which is one of the innovations that happened because of Ethereum and the ERC20 protocol. So if we go back a little bit, right, like one of the things that we're talking about with Uniswap is the sort of second generation of buying cryptocurrencies, right? It used to be you had to go through one of these centralized counterparties. And then these brilliant guys at Uniswap decided, hey, let's figure out a way to, instead of you having to get on chain and then just keep your economic energy locked in a centralized exchange where you don't hold your own keys, let's figure out a way to put this in a smart contract such that you can trade against a liquidity pool that is always there for you. So instead of just, trying to trade on BitMEX or something, or having to look at all these centralized tools where you had to find a counterparty for your trade, Uniswap's innovation was not just, hey, let's put this all in a smart contract, but let's have never-ending liquidity for you. So if you want to sell your asset, you don't have to find someone else to buy it. You can sell it against this liquidity that exists between you and all the other users of the protocol. So that's, in my opinion, the really cool thing about Uniswap and the way it was born. Sam, do you want to add to that at all?
There's I like V3, and Stoic didn't touch on it, but he did a great job of like the introduction into it. And when you look at like Uniswap, so they're like the OGs, they're the GOAT in the DEX world. There's nuance in other areas, but generally speaking. And they have V2, which they came out with before. They came out with V1 and V2, and now they have V3. And there's a big difference between V2 and V3, both in terms of efficiency of your capital, but also in terms of the data one can see in the marketplace. I have a little thing that I pulled up. I'm going to try to share it with you to show you guys. Because there's a massive, I don't know if you can see this, hopefully, RH.
Yep.
Okay, so this here is what V2 liquidity looks like. So if you think about like a marketplace that's efficient, where are all the prices? Generally speaking, all the liquidity is going to hover right around where the price is. If you look at, like, say, luxury goods, if you look at, say, banana prices at a farmer's market, you're going to see little aberrations, like this one's 35 cents a pound, this one's 43 cents a pound, this is 28 cents a pound, right? But they're all going to be generally within like this certain price range that people are selling their stuff at. You're not going to see things at like a fraction of a penny for a pound, and you're not going to see things for $8 a pound for bananas. Well, if you use V2 for liquidity, it artificially pushes it, makes the market less efficient. Tremendous innovation, like massive innovation. Like, think about what has taken place. Everybody focuses on a token, right? Because we like tokens, right? But I think one of the really, really big innovations that not enough people talk about is liquidity. Because whether it's in terms of race, like black people couldn't vote, women couldn't vote or didn't have certain rights, right? Or in today's world, the rules are changing slightly over the last couple of years, but accredited investors is effectively forcing people with not a lot of money outside of the bubble of opportunity, right? So if you're not an accredited investor, that's like 200, 300 grand if you're married, and you have, or you have $1 million of assets, you're not allowed to invest in this bubble of assets, this opportunity, right? So if I was like, hey, we have this great, amazing opportunity. It's called crypto. Wait, you don't have 250? I'm sorry, bro. Like, but what this has done with Uniswap and DEXs, it has opened the door so that there's not any discrimination to the marketplace globally. Anybody can have access to the market. Anybody, right? Think about what's happened over the last 36 months, where we've seen, I don't like what you have to say, so we're just going to shut you off from the marketplace. That marketplace being, say, having a voice to speak, right? They've been able to shut that door. This door is open to everybody globally, independent of your government, independent of your belief system, independent of the color of your skin, independent of your sex. And this is amazing. It is a massive, massive, massive like innovation that I don't think people fully understand at this point. When you look at V3, V3 allows you to have more of a natural distribution for liquidity. So if you look at the difference between this, right, let me change the color here. V2 pushes all the liquidity across a flat line with just the way the AMM works, and it's not NFTs. It's, I can get into the details if you like, where V3 allows you to spread your liquidity over where you want, right? So if you're selling your bananas for $9, do you think you're going to sell any bananas for $9 when everybody else is selling them for 35 cents? No, right? So you're like, maybe I don't want to put my capital at $9, which it's effectively doing right here, right? Maybe I don't want to put it there because I'm never going to sell anything, i.e. not going to earn any fees in here. I don't want to take up or like go, further, but Stoic, are you have any thoughts on V3 or V2 and the whole liquidity piece that like it's a giant innovation in my opinion?
Yeah, I mean, let's just explain a little bit about what we mean by liquidity here, right? So V2 and V3 here, what Sam is describing is a relationship between two different assets. And those different assets can be stable coins, they can be wrapped Bitcoin, they could be Ethereum. The point is that when you provide liquidity to a decentralized exchange, in much the same way as when you own your own private keys, you're acting like your own bank. When you own the liquidity in a V2 pair or even a V3 pair, you're acting like the centralized exchange. You're saying to the rest of the marketplace, here is capital that I've locked in the smart contract, so it's safe. I can withdraw it if I need to. There's no time lock period. But I am willing to sell one asset for the other as the price changes. So it used to be the case in V2 that if you were, say, on the ETH to USDC pair, you would when you started the liquidity pool, you would have to have 50% on either side of the pair. And that's what Sam is talking about an inefficient system. V2 was excellent to get economic energy such that people could transact with it, but it was inefficient in the sense that it always had to be balanced 50-50. So your holdings, as the ETH price went up, would progressively be less ETH and more USDC. And similarly, as the ETH price went down, you would be effectively buying Ethereum with your USDC. So you have to think about it in those terms a little bit. These are two assets. If you're going to be an LP, these are two assets that you probably want to hold. And you have to be mindful of the fact that as the price moves, and there could be two prices moving, in the example I've used, only one price moves, but you have to be understanding that your asset is being bought and sold all the time as it rebalances with the market.
That's one of the pieces between V2 and V3 from like you're like, I don't really want to provide liquidity, but I love learning about this stuff. Well, you get a lot more information with V3. So if you look at this chart here, let me see if I can pull it up. You get to actually see the difference here, right? So if you could see this chart here, you understand where the liquidity is actually positioned in the marketplace. So if you're curious about what's going on with liquidity, we'll pull up some real world examples later on. Or maybe you're on the LP, like you think it's fun. I think it's fun. I think it's interesting. It's fascinating to me. And I like earning returns. So maybe I want to take a look at something and understand what's going on. There's an interesting example that I'll pull up later between Hex and Hedron, where the number you would see in V2 only tells you there's 50% of this asset and 50% of this asset. When you look at the information on V3, you get to see that 69.4% of it is Hex, and 31 point whatever it is USDC, right? So it tells you that more of the market is in Hex than in USDC. And what do we know about an efficient market? Over time, it is always going to be 50-50 or thereabouts. It'll aberrate like back and forth, but you're always going to have a market in an efficient like market over a long enough period of time that is around 50%. And V2 doesn't do that. So it requires, like how Stoic was saying, it requires you to take your capital and basically put it at places where it doesn't make sense to put it, right? Like if I was like, hey guys, why don't you take some of your DCA money and start buying treasury bonds? You're like, Sam, that is 50% less than the annual rate of inflation. Why would I do that? Well, the same thing goes with V2. You're putting capital in places that is never going to be used. Why would you do that? Everything's going to be moving to V3. Go ahead. Sorry.
I just a question on that too, because I mean, a lot of people listening may be thinking too, okay, they exist. V2 is still there. There's plenty of liquidity for different tokens. Why would anyone use it when V3 is there? Like, what are the advantages? What are the situations where you'd want to use V2 versus V3?
Stoic, you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. You would want to use, or I just have to be very careful that I'm not giving investment advice here. I know I've talked about this recently, right? So when I say this, I'm talking about me, right? Like if I were going to go and do a liquidity pool where I had very little information about previous price movement, or where I couldn't easily predict future price movement, and I still wanted to hold the two assets that I was pairing, I might want to use V2 because even though it is less efficient, I am less likely to wind up in a situation where the price of the asset moves out of the range of my liquidity such that I'm no longer earning fees. So that would be, an example of like, let's say that there was a coin that had launched very recently, like within the last month, say, and, there was a large amount of minting of that coin, but no price chart history. And it was likely to be incredibly volatile. You might want to, or I might want to go and put my LP on V2 such that, it's going to be volatile. It's going to move around, but I'm never going to not be making fees. So it's less efficient in terms of the fee generation, but it's also less risky in the sense that you won't get ranged out.
Have you, and this is more of like a question or thought that I have in that example, where if you have, say, a brand new token, and one of the things that like people will manipulate these markets in crypto, it's not illegal to manipulate markets. So 100% these markets are manipulated across the board because people with capital want more capital and they find it fun to use their capital in a way that wastes them more money. So they will use that, whether it is paying people to write articles so that they fund things, whether it's using leverage, whether it's playing around with liquidity or this, that, and the other thing. If a token just comes out, right? In the case of what Stoic was saying, I might actually enjoy taking my token that just came out, and because it's brand new, there's no liquidity out there for it, which means I get to actually set up the LP position. When you have the opportunity to set up an LP position for the first time, where there's going to be some type of volume, I think it would be a good idea. I've set up a couple pairs for the first time. I like the idea of setting it up as artificially high so that you can actually benefit and sell your shit really expensive to other people. So if I'm the first person to that farmer's market and I'm the only one who wants bananas, and for whatever reason, a movie just came out about bananas and everybody's in the market to buy bananas, the token just came out and they're all out there. They want more bananas because there's no liquidity out there, right? Nobody else has bananas at the marketplace. I will just sell my bananas for $4.50, right? Until other fuckers start to show up. But at that time, the price has come down. The ratio has come down. So in another way, yes, you can set it up because you don't really know what Stoic was saying and you don't know which side it's going to go to. Yes. But another way, from an opportunistic standpoint, you can set it up and sell your shit like at a higher price than you might otherwise be able to potentially. But it depends on like what you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to buy and hold a study. You're just trying to earn a fee. Like it depends on how you want to approach that. So like, go ahead, Stoic.
It sounds like it's based on the pair too, somewhat, as Stoic sort of gave an example there with some of the new coins that you may not know much about, may not have price history, things like that. Are there certain pairs that either on V2 or V3 they're just win-win pretty much? Is it like Hexacosa or versus, for example, Hexacosa versus Hex USDC? Like, what is the difference in liquidity providing between those two?
Stoic, what are your thoughts on that? Because it depends on the person.
Yeah, it depends on your level of complexity and how you read charts, right? Because the vast majority of us read a USDC chart or a chart that is against US dollar. And so most people understand the charts in those terms. So if that's the case, it's probably easier to be a USDC liquidity provider because you only have to track the range of one asset and you only have to chart one asset, right? The way to do, like, in my opinion, the way to do like the second level of being an LP is probably to try and LP two assets that are tied together for some reason. And so you can see in the case of like Hex and Maxi, an example of this, right? I mentioned this on the Twitter space this morning with GRC. Like, you would expect that the Maxi price relative to Hex should come after the end of the 15-year stake to a point where one Maxi is worth 5.5 Hex. Now, the reason is because the inflation in the Maxi contract or the Maxi stake should give you 450% yield over the course of that 15-year stake, right? So you would expect the Maxi price relative to Hex to trade from 1-to-1 up to a point where there are 5.5 Hex per Maxi, right? So when you have a derivative of another product, it can be really easy to look at because you can tell in a rational market how the price should move relative to the other thing. And I mean, I think, LPing derivatives of Hex can be very, very, very useful because you have exposure to not only Hex, but also the inflation from a Hex stake while you're getting LP fees, right? And you should be able to predict the price movement relatively accurately. You can get ranged out at either the high or the low end. It's certainly possible, but in a rational market, you should be able to predict it. And that's why I was so surprised, for example, to see Deci, Trio Lucky, etc., the other derivatives trading at a deficit to Hex, because what that meant was they had gone out of the rational range. It shouldn't be the case that you should have a Deci trading for less than a Hex because it's backed by more than one Hex, right? So that's just something to think about if you're going to trying to LP two assets that have a fluctuating price, is if one is a derivative of the other, it can be easier to predict the price movements and therefore your ranges.
And like, to piggyback on that, there's people in crypto who only own one asset, right? But there's a lot of people in crypto who own multiple assets. So say, for example, in a hypothetical that somebody owns 4 assets, right? They like 4 different cryptos, and maybe one of those is USDC. Well, generally speaking, if you have USDC and 3 volatile assets, whether it's Hex, Maxi, Cosa, or some other stuff that you like, if you think about it as in a entirety of a portfolio, you probably don't want all your money in LP, but maybe a number greater than 0, at least from a learning perspective, might be a good idea, right? So like probably less than a 100%, but probably greater than 0% in an LP pool. So when you think about that, you're like, okay, cool. Let's do 10% in an LP pool. So if you take the assets you already own, that you already like, that you're going to continue to DCA in, it doesn't make sense to me to just not provide liquidity with those and earn fees in both of those things. So how the fees work is if I show up to the table and I have Hex and I want Maxi, right? Then the thing I have to pay with is what I show up with, right? So I show up with Hex and I want Maxi. So I pay with Hex. So the fee most often, it's variable, but like it most often is 0.3%. So I'm going to show up with 10,000 USD value worth of Hex. I'm going to pay 0.3% of that as a fee. Now, somebody else, Stoic, shows up on the other side and he's like, hey, I've got Maxi and the premium is really high right now and I'm going to swap over to Hex, right? So he shows up with 10,000 Maxi or 6,000 or 50,000 or whatever it is. And he goes through and swaps the other direction because he showed up to the table with Maxi. He pays the fee in Maxi. So whatever token comes to the table, that's what the fee is going to be in that direction. So when you provide liquidity, you earn fees in the two assets, right? So if you're like, I have a portfolio of 4 assets, USDC and 3 volatile assets, and I'm going to continue to DCA into these assets on a weekly, monthly basis. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me to not take a small portion, even if you just want to learn and grow as a person, and put these into an LP position to earn more of the things that you already have and like and want. Do you know what I mean? Well,
is there having 10,000 hexes different than having 100,000 hex to put up for LP, right? Like what is, if somebody just new getting into it and they say, hey, I want to put part of my bag or I have some set aside that I want to try to earn fees for, is there a minimum that makes sense for the average person or outside of learning, like, hey, I guess even with passive income, say I want to make passive income with that, is there a certain number or dollar amount, a certain number of tokens that would make sense for providing LP?
I think that, like, for the everyday type person, like the biggest thing that they could probably focus on is trying to get their income up in like real world. Like whatever you do for real world, like start a side hustle, like figure out how to get into sales, figure out how to grow your income, figure out how to improve you as a person, because that's like the best investment you could possibly do. But if you're like, hey, I have some capital, I'm going to continue to focus on myself, but I want to start learning LP. If you're on Ethereum, I mean, you could do it with $100, but when you adjust a position, you pay 3 fees. So like, say you have a position set up and it's tax and Maxi here, and you have a range, which we can talk about in a moment. Say you have this range set up between these 2 lines here, and the price of the ratio between these 2 actually shifts, right? I'm gonna try to click that line here, but I don't know if it's gonna let me. This price here shifts, and now it's outside of your range. So that means you're not earning fees and you're all in one asset. So what do you do if you're all in one asset? So first fee you pay is to pull your fees and your position. So you pay 1 fee there. Then you say it's all in Hex, right? So you're all in Hex. So you're going to like, okay, I'm going to convert about 50% of the Hex back into Maxi so I can set up a new position so that I can re-put this in the middle of the range, right? And you pay another fee to do that. But now you have, say, 50% Hex and 50% Maxi. And then you enter into a new smart contract to place those 2 assets into LP, right? So you pay 3 fees there. So when you think about like, what's the minimum somebody could use to provide LP? If you have $100 and it's, say, $7 for the first fee, $7 for the third fee, and because it's a smart contract with 2 assets where you're putting it into LP, that fee tends to be a little bit more. So say that one's $12, right? So you've paid $26 in fees, right? You paid 26% of your entire bag in fees. It takes longer to earn that back to be profitable. Whereas if you have the capacity to put in, say, $2,000, you could be profitable within 24 hours to 48 hours, depending on the range and the volatility, or basically the trading volume on there. Stoic, what are your thoughts on the minimum amount? Or if you
Yeah, Sam, you're exactly right to identify that the thing that's going to hold you back with small amounts of capital is the amount of fees that you're going to have to pay. And that's one of the risks with being an LP on V3 as opposed to V2 is that if you don't watch the charts, you can get ranged out, which is what Sam was talking about, where you wind up with one asset as opposed to the other. And that just means that you do actually, it's not quite passive income in a sense, right? V2 is passive income because you don't have to watch it. You know that it's going to sit there at a 50-50 ratio. But V3 isn't passive in the same sense unless you pick a very wide or a full range. You actually have to watch the charts. You actually have to be engaged in them. You actually kind of have to look into capital flows and how people are trading. You should probably learn about sandwich attacks and things like this because there's a lot to it. So I don't want to give the impression that V3 is a cruise, right? It's not. You do have to watch those charts in order to be effective at it.
Hey, just want to hit impermanent loss while we're here too. Just or any other risk you can think of, for the intro to LP. So, what is impermanent loss? How can it happen? And when are there pairs more risky or more prone to it happening? You getting one side you don't want, all that stuff.
Stoic, you want to talk about impermanent loss? I have I think might be a little bit different than like what a lot of people think of impermanent loss.
So with Uniswap V3, which is what we're talking about, right? Like, it's important to recognize what Sam was saying there, which is when you start with one asset or a combination of two assets and you go to the top or bottom of your range, effectively what you have done is you have sold your asset, the one asset you held, for the other asset that you held over time. So use an example on a range, right? Let's say we were talking about the HEX price and the HEX chart between HEX and USDC. If the price is 10 cents and I have half my money, or I have all my money there, but 50-50 split, if the price goes down to under 5 cents, effectively what I've been doing over time is buying HEX with my USDC, such that now when I'm at 5 cents or below, I now only have HEX. Similarly, it can be a sales strategy if you're trying to get out of HEX or another asset, that if you put it on at 10 cents and it goes above 15, now suddenly you're at a point where you only have USDC. So frankly, from my perspective, like, one of the ways that I use this is to avoid having slippage on any sort of DEX order. Because if you just pick a range and you're patient enough, you can actually sell off your asset over a range, and it means you have no slippage. And in fact, you're not trying to execute an order at a specific price unless you do limit. So you wind up with a better order execution too. Impermanent loss is really the difference between what you would have had if you had just held the asset as the price went up, as opposed to what you hold in terms of your USD value by being an LP. And so a lot of people think really hard about impermanent loss, and it worries them because they're like, well, if I had just held the asset up to 15 cents, then I'd have HEX and I'd have it all at 15 cents and I'd have more money and it could go higher. And right. So that's definitely a concern if you're worried about that. But if you recognize that you're selling the asset in the range or buying the asset in the range, then it's not impermanent loss. It's just you being a DCA. It's just a DCA strategy where you're going up and down. That's my perspective on it. Sam, what do you think?
I think of it as like an opportunity cost. I don't remember if you were married in any of the conversations, Stoic, or Max, if you have a girlfriend or a wife. But I have a girlfriend. She's amazing, right? But I could have had a different girlfriend. So like if I chose to dwell on the fact that there's a hot girl at the gym that I could sleep with, right? If I chose to think about that, I'm like, fuck, I'm with my girlfriend, right? That's an opportunity cost. And when you think about, like Stoic was saying, you recognize like what it actually is. Impermanent loss, if you think about it like asset A and asset B. Asset A goes up by a 10x over some period of time, and asset B goes up by a 3x. So during that time, if it was 6 months, right, what's happened? People have bought the asset that is going up in value from you, meaning you have less of that, And the assets that's only done a 3x, you have more of that. So if you look at your portfolio, you're like, okay, I had $1,000 and I could have had a 10x on that if I just held asset A. I held a combination of A and B, which means that part of my portfolio went up by a 10x, right, during this time. And part of my portfolio went up by a 3x. And during that whole entire time, I was earning fees along the way. And there's multiple different strategies you can utilize these fees to reduce the risk or perceived risk or the opportunity cost of putting money into LP. Now, the example Stoic was mentioning, let's say we're going to use $1,000 here for LP. I think personally, I like the minimum, like if somebody's doing it, is around $2,000 because depending on what the fees are like. But check, if you guys can, it's probably hard to see if you're watching on your phone, but they're split between Hex and USDC, right? So if you look at the chart on the right, the green line at the top is the range in which you're selling in, and the green line is the bottom is what the range you're selling in. Right? That's going to be where you choose to buy and sell your USDC for Hex, back and forth. It doesn't matter which direction people want to go. You're like, I will earn the fee from that, right? Sam's coming to the table with Hex and he wants USDC. I'll sell him that and I'll earn a portion of the fees, right? So check these numbers here, right? Where Hex and USDC. Watch what happens as the price changes, right? It comes down towards this bottom range, and we went from $900 in USDC to now we have $1,700 in USDC. And then say it comes down all the way out here. What do we have? We have $2,000 in USDC. And then 7 minutes later or 4 days later, say it swung back and goes over here. Now you're all in Hex. So that's effectively how you can think about what impermanent loss is. One of the strategies that I like is thinking about it from a coin count perspective. So say, for example, in this example, we're $2,000. When the price is in your range, if you chose this specific range, you're earning about 8% a month, right? You're earning $150 a month. Cool. Well, what if you took your $150 minus fees and you decided to buy the asset that you wanted, right? So say if you want more Hex, right? You have another wallet set up. You take your $150, say you earn that, you pull that twice a month, right? So you pull $75 and then you pull $75. So one way to think about this is you can use LP as a way to increase your DCA into any asset that you like. So Stoic, you had an example. I don't know if you want to share it here, but I think GRC said you shared it in Spaces of how you use LP.
That's the question I was going to ask too, which is how, a lot of people have been talking about how, instead of doing market buys and limit buy and trading like that, using LP to gain positions, which I think is what Sam's alluding to.
Yeah, I've only got 1 minute until I got to jump off. I'm sorry, guys, but yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, something I mentioned this morning is that I run a huge portion of the budget of our business off LP positions. And I sort of went to our employees when they first started with me, or when each one starts with me, and said, you can get paid on chain or you can get paid in the real world. You guys decide. If you want to get paid on chain, pick the assets you want to get paid in. I'll LP them for you. And that'll mean that I can just pay you largely in fees. Every now and then you've got to dip into a little bit of principal, which kind of sucks. But you've just got this much better way to preserve capital that allows you to be paying people in your organization all the time, just off sitting there in LP. It's fantastic. You don't quite have that same flexibility in almost anything else, right? You don't have that flexibility by buying a new car for the business or by renting additional office space or anything like that. But if you keep it in this one sort of fashion, then and you're smart about it, you don't overcommit to any one pair, you can do really well with it for your organization. So I like holding capital in that way. I think it's smart. I think it's efficient. And for us, it certainly works. And as long as you have people who want to get paid in your company in that particular format, then it works really well. Anyway, sorry. I appreciate it, guys. I got to jump.
I appreciate it. Thanks,
Great seeing you, Stoic. Have a great night.
Cheers, boys. Thanks.
So you had mentioned like using it to enter into a position, right? That's where you're kind of getting at.
Yeah, I've talked about it a couple times with Axis too, of just thinking of, and I know this may have happened with, I thought there was a conversation that if Stoic had more time, maybe we would talk about, I think it happened for weight. There was a bunch of liquidity that went back and forth. Actually, I'm not sure if it was used to sell or not, but I think there have been people using liquidity positions to get another coin that they want out of another coin instead of doing market trades. So what do you know about that?
So like if this is a real world, this is actual data, right? So this is the HEX USDC pair here at the 3, and you're in the pool of the 3%, because you can do a 1% pool or like 0.1% pool. Like there's multiple different pools, but this is the pool that we're looking at right here. You see this little spike of a line here, right? Or this one over here. Mm-hmm. You can think about both those as range orders. So with V2, you have to put 50% of A and 50% of B up there. With V3, this position over here is all one asset. So you can do single-sided staking in V3. You're not going to earn any fees doing this, right? Because it's sitting outside of the range. You only earn fees where the pink line is, right? So the pink line is right here, you're earning fees. If it's over here, you're earning fees at this spot, right? So if that's why the capital efficiency of like the chart was like this versus a straight line, right? Because people like want to earn more fees. Like, why keep your capital on either side when you don't earn any fees? Why do you put it closer together? You earn greater fees, right? So if somebody wants to enter into a position, they could do a single-sided stake, right? So say this was HEX, or say this is USDC. So what happens when the price goes from here to, well, it won't actually go through there, but let's use this other one right here. Let's say it goes from here to over here, and they have HEX, right? And they want to sell their HEX, right? But they've got 6 million HEX, and they don't want to pay slippage, right? They don't, like Stoic was saying, you don't want to pay slippage. So if you guys don't know what slippage is, it's probably the most expensive cost you pay if you use Uniswap and you use like any dollar amount above, a grand or a couple grand. The slippage can be, 1, 2, 3, 5%, right? And if you have $10,000, 5% is $500, right? You pay an Ethereum fee of $10 and you pay the 0.3% fee here, but the greatest fee you pay is in slippage, right? So people don't like to pay slippage, right? So you could set this single-sided stake up as just HEX, and then you're like, I think the price is going to come down, right? So let me pull this up so you can see it. So this is where the price is, but you're like, FTX shit's going on, right? You have this other stuff's going on. The government's incompetent. There's all this crazy stuff going on. I think prices are going to come down, right? So you're like, you set it up all as HEX. When it goes from here to here, you have effectively traded all of your HEX for USDC and sold your position without any slippage and earned fees while you did it. So you can effectively eliminate slippage and earn fees at the same time. I actually have a developer who is building me a bot to do this automatically, because one of the features that Uniswap should have, I don't know why it doesn't, but it should have this. You can think of another way of a range order as a limit order. It's effectively a limit order. People think V3 don't have limit orders. It's just because they don't understand the system. This is effectively a limit order, except for a limit order, you still have to pay slippage. With a range order, you don't have to pay slippage and you earn fees in here.